Dr. Rachna Varia today, who is one of the co-founders of Mindwell Psychology. They're great partners with Flint Hill for many, many years, supporting us as learning specialists and our students and families. So we're thrilled to have such an expert here speaking with us today. This is a little departure from how we usually run our LC parent coffees. So you'll have to let me know if you prefer having some outside speakers come in as opposed to having to listen to me drone on. So without further ado, I'll let Dr. Varia take it over.
Hi everyone. Oh, thanks so much for coming on this very, very cold day. So I have a very fancy title for something that's not that fancy, right? So, but I thought that I put the title into ChatGPT and it created this. From red flags to roadmaps, supporting diverse, all learners through cognitive insights. But I'm really going to be talking about attention, visual learning, verbal learning, and most importantly, how to make learning explicit. How do we know what our kids' strengths are? How do we know what their relative weaknesses might be? And for them to own both, okay? So again, I've been a clinical psychologist for 25 years, and I did co-found Mindwell, but recently sold the business, but now I'm just working there as a clinician and really enjoying doing more of this sharing presentations, sharing knowledge. I'm also a mother of 24 years, and I bring that up because my two girls, one in grad school now, one in college, had very different learning styles. And so while they were growing up and I was practicing neuropsychology, I realized that one size does not fit all. And so a lot of this presentation is informed by that. Okay, so the brain, right? The basis of learning. It can work for us and it can work against us. So finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of years. Can everyone count how many F's there are in this slide? The letter F. I'm just going to give you 10, 15 seconds. It's just one sentence. All right, how many do I got? Three, four. Oh, okay, you got it, six F's. Now, it's not like it's hard to identify F, right? We all know what F is. So I'm sure you got the F for finished, files. Maybe you got the F in scientific, but did you get the F in of? That's our brain taking shortcuts, right? And we don't always process all the information. So think about it, when your child is in class, are they taking everything in? Our brains like to take shortcuts. No one look at their phone or computer, but does everyone know what the Apple logo looks like? It's the most ubiquitous logo in the world. What does it look like? Is it this? Is that it? No. Is it this? No. Is it this? No. Okay. Could someone draw it for me? Would you know which way the leaf goes? Which way the bite is? In a study they did, 85% of respondents could not identify the Apple logo, whether they were an Apple or PC user. Okay, so this is the Apple logo. There's a little bit of a bite on the right, the leaf tilting this way. Again, why is that important? Because even something we're seeing every day, we haven't fully encoded, right? So again, this is what might be happening with our kids in the classroom. You think they're being exposed to the knowledge, the information, the data, but are they taking it in? Okay, so what I really want to talk about in this presentation is what are we attending to as parents, as teachers, as students? How are we attending to it? What might be getting in our way and what helps with engagement? So a lot of my presentation is going to talk about different types of learning. You know, does it help to diagram? Does it help to understand something spatially? Does it help to create verbal mediation, right? So you can just see from the comic, she's understanding this very, in a linear verbal way, the instructions. And he's just sort of looking at it from a whole visual spatial perspective. Now, why this really interested me is, gosh, probably 15, 18 years ago, my daughter Simran was learning the Great Lakes in grade school, okay? And she had to memorize all the Great Lakes, and I was like, Simran, I have a really good tool for you. Okay, so Superman helps everyone, okay? So the S, like the S is for superior. And then you go down here, and M is for Michigan. And then we got Huron. And then we got Erie. And then we got Ontario. So just remember, Superman helps everyone. And I was like a proud mom. I was like, this is such a good mnemonic. I really taught her the path to like memorizing this. This is Simran. Okay, she's like, Superman? What are you talking about? And I was like, well, how are you gonna remember it? She's like, how about if I just look at a map? Now, my visual spatial skills are terrible. Okay, so the idea of looking at a map, I would never do that. But for her visual spatial skills were incredible. So she could just map it out. She could just look at it and not learn all the Superman business, right? So it was really, as parents, we need to know that what works for us might not always work for our child, right? And what might work in math might not work in language arts. What might work at 14 might not work at 18. So it's changing. There's no set way. So making learning more explicit and just knowing your relative strengths and weaknesses. So I can say my visual spatial skills are weaker. I need people to explain the directions to me. I can't create anything from IKEA, right? But I have other strengths. But it's also not black or white, and not every learning weakness is a learning disability. Now, Shannon and I were talking about this, right? Everyone has a learning strength and a learning weakness. And yes, there are also learning disabilities, but both things are true. Know the strengths, know the weaknesses, and absolutely acknowledge, accommodate, and remediate if there's a disability. All right, but first, the role of initiation. So, who's heard of the amygdala hijack? John, what do you know?
The part of your brain that governs worry and anxiety can take over.
Yes.
And control your behavior.
That's right. So the amygdala is a part of the brain, fight or flight, right? It's threat detector. Now, for a lot of our kids, especially those with ADHD, let's say there's a trigger. And the trigger isn't war. It's not a lion about to jump up at you. It's a presentation the next day. It's a book report due next Friday. It's that test that you have to study for. It's that math worksheet that you have to do. But it literally creates a threat response, okay? And there is the amygdala activates. And something that you would think, it's not a big deal, just start studying for the test, literally feels dangerous. And why does it feel dangerous? Because there's a lot of baggage of maybe past failure, of feelings of inadequacy. And so for them, when there's all that baggage, the amygdala takes control and there's a cognitive override. So the prefrontal cortex of the brain is sort of our rational part of the brain. Hey, it's just a quiz. I can just study for a little bit. Hey, that book report's due in 2 weeks. Let me just do a little bit every day. Nope, amygdala's taken over. You got to flee. So the emotional reaction might be avoidance, procrastination, anger, frustration, a meltdown, and then there's impact, right? That thing that was supposed to be not overwhelming has suddenly become overwhelming. So in my testing that I do, I get a lot of self-reports from the kids themselves. And sometimes even when the teacher and parent isn't endorsing problems with executive functioning, this is actually a quote from a high schooler. I don't know where or how to begin the first step, even if they already explained it. It's hard for me to initiate tasks after the teacher's instructions because I don't know where to start. Even if something is done daily, I need to think about how to go about starting it. So I always ask parents, does it ever feel like Groundhog Day? You know, where you're talking about this, like, let's go over how we're gonna get up in the morning and get out the door. Like, didn't we just do this yesterday? So whenever it feels like Groundhog Day, there might be the struggle of initiation. So one of the most important things with kids who have challenges with attention is overcoming that inertia, right? And so it's not just about task completion, but about task initiation. Just get started. It can be the 5-minute method, it can be the 2-minute launch, it can be an energy journal where the student knows what time of day they feel most efficient. They can sort of just motivate themselves. They can pair it with something, stimulating. I mean, for the longest time when I did my taxes, I was eating a scone and a latte. Because, right, I was like pairing something that I just didn't want to do with something pleasurable. And just be aware that, for your child, it really can be overwhelming and freezing. So they might need a brain dump. Maybe they need to just get anything they're thinking about out. Definitely using any codes, cues, whiteboards, and then just the sense of efficacy, right? I've got this, and then there not being too many choices. So breaking down the task, right? And I use a visual like this, that this is what you think it is, but let's just take it one step at a time, and you might need to help them scaffold and break down the task. But the goal is that ultimately they'll be able to break it down themselves, down the road. Maybe not immediately, but they might need that scaffolding. And the whole point of scaffolding is at some point you're able to take the scaffolding away, right? Okay, so just, a couple key things with initiation. Remember that those with ADHD are more likely to shift their attention away from something they're doing to do something that's more interesting. And then it's difficult to return to the original task. So let's say they're working on the book report and then, Facebook is over there or my friend is calling. Then literally transitioning back is so hard. The urgent thing, like the math assignment, might make them feel bad. So again, this is where the amygdala takes over. So they switch to something they'd rather be doing, right? That's human nature. Why do something that makes me feel bad? And then they do, because of the working memory deficit, they forget what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. And nothing lures them back to the original task. So this is a really great video for teens, for kids. Has anyone seen this, The Wall of Awful? Okay, so Google it. It's on YouTube. And it basically describes what kids can often feel like. I know I just have to, study for that task or complete that worksheet, but there's this wall. And it uses the metaphor of the wall of awful. And, how do we stay behind the wall? Do we try to break through the wall in anger, like a Hulk response? Or do we try to take down each piece? What are some coping mechanisms? So a great video to watch. ball of awful. Okay, so let's talk about verbal versus visual learning, because what I want you to start noticing with your children is, how do they learn? Not just what they learn, how do they learn? So whenever I'm doing testing, what I always tell the student is, number one, some things are going to be easy and some things are going to be hard. You're not expected to get everything right. If you got everything right, it'd be sort of weird, okay? But how you feel about it, what you think about it, how you do it is sometimes just as important as the answer. So I need to know, are they using a visual strategy? Are they zoning out? Are they thinking, this is hard? Are they thinking, oh, this is easy, I'm just gonna rush through it? I wanna know what they're thinking. And again, if we can get our kids to know what they're thinking and label it, then externalizing that brings a lot of power. So I'm gonna talk about visual and verbal learning. And this is not binary. It's not like you are one or the other. It's not as if maybe in one subject you're better learning visually, in one subject you're better with auditory learning. So this is about you exploring with your child, how are they learning? How are they taking in information? So a visual learner, right, takes in information that they can see, organize, integrate. So, right, they might really benefit from mind maps, Venn diagrams, flow charts, and there's so many apps now that really help with this. Visual aids like pictures, photographs, infographics. But how about if you hear your child say, I just don't get this graph? And you yourself might be a visual learner, and you might think, well, just look at it. Look at the x-axis and the y-axis. So don't assume that a timeline, a graph, or a diagram is showing them what they need to know. That might be overwhelming. So let's say a timeline, and you're talking about mid-19th century. They might not know where that actually is on the timeline in a span of 100 years, okay? Because their sense of part and the whole is off. So you may need to explain out loud the graph, the diagram, the table. Another red flag is maybe they're skipping lines or words when reading. It's too overwhelming. I hear kids say that all the time. There's too much on the page. And so again, we're going to talk about some ways to sort of accommodate that. They avoid drawing, difficulty copying from the board. So literally the act of looking up, scanning, holding it in mind, getting it down on paper places such a burden on cognitive load, right? So the more time is spent scanning and trying to remember than encoding the information. Maybe the math problems aren't lining up. So they get how to do the math conceptually, but when they're carrying the number, that's what I called it, carrying the number. What do they call it now? Regrouping? Okay. And it gets off. It's sort of like the misalignment, because again, visually, things aren't structured. They can get lost with spatial directions. So when there's a weakness in visual learning, and when it can go into a visual learning disability, visual motor integration, visual perceptual issues, you're going to see impact, maybe on handwriting, right? They're spacing. They sort of, when they're writing, it ends up at the end of the page and they don't realize how much space they have left. Spelling. Spelling is visual. Spelling is based on orthography, or the visual sequencing of letters. And so that I before E or E before I doesn't visually make sense. Math, like I said, maybe they're understanding it conceptually, but lining up the multitasking, And I see a lot of kids who can do very well at algebra or pre-cal, but not as well with geometry if there's a visual perceptual issue. Science, so think about it. That's diagrams. That if you're learning the water cycle and you're like, I don't even know where to start or where to end with this, then any type of model might be difficult to learn. Again, note-taking, because you're having to pair what you're hearing into a visual response. Scantron sheets, right? The actual, like, here's the question, and then moving to another place and filling it in. A lot of kids with visual processing issues can't track that as well. And then it's putting a cognitive burden on, did I complete the right circle, rather than are you getting the question right? Transcribing, so that's one of the biggest accommodations I make, especially for younger kids. For someone who has a visual processing deficit, the idea of copying a spelling list is torture, right? Like, here's the word, now copy it on this page, copy it on this page. They're not learning the spelling, they're really feeling burdened by the actual act of copying. And then I could do a whole talk on the visual impact of writing, but obviously, writing more than any other task places the most demands on executive functioning, right? Because you're having to think about sequence and vocabulary and punctuation and contextual conventions and what you're trying to convey, and that's multitasking, and it can feel really overwhelming. So just a concrete example. This was actually one of the student I tested, and they brought in this worksheet, and right, it's like all over the place and disorganized. So trying to complete a math problem with a little white space, and then not being able to track the sequencing. And look at what the teacher asked. Where is your answer, right? And so then that doesn't feel good. I mean, obviously the student was working really, really hard at it, trying to organize the visual information, but it was overwhelming and it was too scrunched. There wasn't enough space. So just at a very basic level, this is where, having the notes ahead of time can be really helpful. For some people, even having sort of a little bit of a raised line, just so they're getting sort of that motor kinesthetic input when they're handwriting. Obviously using, a keyboard or a computer instead of handwriting. And then, I know so much is done on computers nowadays, but especially for younger kids, enlarging the worksheets. We call them considerate worksheets. Sometimes there's just too much on a worksheet, and the amygdala kicks in, and it's just like, that's overwhelming. For someone who might struggle with visual learning, to allow oral responses, to use larger manipulatives, encourage the use of graph paper for math, and experiment with what type of graph paper works. Just Google it, 3/8 inch, 1/2 inch, and print it. And what helps your child sort of keep it structured? Combination of no Scantron, and then really make sure that their visual field when they're learning is not too cluttered, right? Like too much on a table, they're not gonna know what's essential and what's not essential. So, just for example, if you might assume, well, there's the timeline right in front of you, just look at that. Help them narrate out loud what the timeline is communicating. Narrate the graph. Read out the data points for the table. Explain the relationships in a diagram verbally. You might use metaphor, analogy. And then use prompts and sort of make it more auditory. And while you're accommodating the weaknesses in visual memory, visual processing, visual learning, also build visual strategies. Okay, so I want you to all think of a whale, okay? And again, I do this with my students where after we've done some auditory memory testing, And I've asked them, well, how were you trying to remember what I was saying? And they're like, well, I just said what you said. But basically, under my breath, I said, but by the time I was getting to the third thing, you were still repeating the first thing, right? So in a lecture class, let's say, a student's just like, okay, and I'm just gonna remember what she said, but then you might be zoning out with the rest of the lecture. So I say, did you ever see a picture of what I was saying while I was saying it? And sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. I said, let's do this. Think of a whale. So I might have a 14-year-old say, okay, I'm not going to describe the whale to me. Yeah, it's blue, it's big, it's a big whale. Okay, well, what ocean is it in? Oh, you didn't ask me that. I know, but go ahead and let's place it somewhere. Okay, it's in the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, what direction is it going? Oh, I guess towards the UK. What is it feeling? Hungry? You said blue whale, but what color blue? I guess it's actually, I guess I can imagine a light blue, gray whale. Is it hungry? Is there anything around it? Does it remind you of anything? We're making that whale meaningful. In a year, and sometimes I do this, I will call the student back and I'll say, do you remember the animal that I told you to remember? And they all remember the whale. Not because I told them to remember it, right? But because they filled in the detail. So in a lecture class, are our kids creating their own narrative and stories? Or when they're learning, is it just sort of passively washing over them? So I go home and ask your child to think of something, see what they're thinking, see what they're seeing in their mind's eye, and then have them fill it in, and then have them practice doing that in a lecture class, when they're reading, when they're writing. A great book is Visualizing and Verbalizing by Nancy Bell, and it basically walks you through how you visualize sentences, words, what you read, what you hear. So again, you might not be an automatic visual learner, but you can strengthen this skill by making it more explicit. Okay, so let's just sort of switch to how about if you're more of a verbal learner, right? They might learn more from reading, writing, listening, using language, discussion. Then yeah, you really want to teach through discussion, Socratic questioning, maybe creative storytelling, preview and review verbally, right? I'm going to tell you what the goal of this lesson is and what it should look like at the end, and then let's talk about it at the end. But how about if there are red flags with auditory or verbal learning? So there might be some red flags. They often need instructions repeated or written down. Struggling with oral directions. And you'll see that this all sort of, there can be a lot of overlap, right? With attention issues, auditory processing. But again, red flags you should be looking for. Maybe they're missing details in lectures. Maybe, we're gonna focus on these last two. Not understanding vocabulary, asking, well, what does that word mean? And difficulty with inference. Now, especially in the high school setting, right? It's no longer about just memorize this. You wanna have the student understand, what's the author's tone? What did it mean to you? What's the bigger picture? And a lot of kids that I work with, they've done well through grade school, middle school, because it's what we call more crystallized learning, right? They've had to memorize different topics and sort of regurgitate it back. But then when they're asked to do higher level reading comprehension of like, well, what does this mean? And what is the author trying to say? And they're like, well, that's not in the passage. Right, you have to sort of think about it, take that leap. So I am a big fan of using a proverb every day with my kids. And proverbs are going out of style. And a proverb, metaphor, simile, idiom, I really think as parents, we can make that fun, you know, and we can say, what does this phrase mean? So I had a student who was reading, you know, beautiful decoding, no dyslexia, strong decoder, but comprehension was weak. Not because there was a decoding issue, but when she was reading, she let the cat out of the bag. She's like, what cat? What, like, I didn't know there was a cat in this story. And you know, not realizing that it was a metaphor about a secret being revealed. So, at home, practice similes, idioms, metaphors. And you might say, well, that's not part of the assignment, or that's not what they're doing in language arts. Right, as a parent, that's just promoting critical thinking, and it's so fun. You can just do it at the dinner table. So you might just like pick a phrase and ask them what they think about it, or deconstruct a proverb, right? One of the first great modern novel, Don Quixote. This is where the "don't put all your eggs in one basket" came from. So it's quoted from, it's the part of a wise man to keep himself today for tomorrow and not venture all his eggs in one basket. So maybe they're reading this, and then you're like, okay, so that's sort of built this contemporary phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Now my guess is a lot of kids might not know what that means, because again, we don't use proverbs as much. So make it a discussion. What do you think that means? Can you give me a real life example? Maybe just applying to one college isn't a great idea. Maybe just relying on one friend. Maybe just investing in one stock, right? Like why is that phrase important? What is it trying to teach us? Have them create their own proverb. Now, the reason I'm putting up these slides is I really think we need to promote critical thinking. This isn't just about them learning for the test and them doing well on the ACT or SAT. I promise you, by being more thinking of the whale and filling it in, by thinking of proverbs and thinking of language, they will engage more because they're in charge of it. I'm also a big fan of categorical thinking and modeling and teaching categorical thinking. So verbal thinking helps students organize, understand, and communicate information. What's one of the most popular categorical thinking games that's out right now? Anyone know? I think you'll recognize it. New York Times Connections, right? Love it. And even, you know, it's definitely for kids 15, 16 older, make your own connections. There's an app, and you can make it for your 7-year-old, your 9-year-old, because you want them to understand language at a deeper level. Okay, I see cell. Cell reminds me, okay, science, maybe there's something else, science. Mole, wait, no, a mole, like maybe there's a net. Oh, mole can mean 2 things. Okay, atom, and you're getting them thinking about words. And we communicate through words, and we want it to be sophisticated, right? Is the bank talking about where we keep our money, or, wait a minute, bank, a river bank? Okay, a river bank. And if you can do this out loud with the kids, it's a fun activity. So just so you know the answer. Right, cell, virus, mole, atom, channel, bank, range, orbit, bark, root, branch, leaf. And this is, you know, the purple category is always hard. It can be either a noun or a verb. But if you can get your kids to talk about language and that words have different meanings, for someone who's weaker in auditory and verbal learning, it's just a great way to make it more fun, more engaging. And when they're reading, when they're analyzing, when they're writing, they can think about these things. So remember, the brain grows. This is from the New York Times, and it shows the blue is sort of the brain developing from age 6 to 18. And you'll see it takes a long time for the brain to come fully online, right? So our kids, there's the neuroplasticity of the brain, and they need to know that they can learn to learn. Nothing is fixed. That learning changes the brain. Failure is not a permanent condition. The brain grows, and just that power. There's a really great study. It was with first graders, and with half the first graders, they told them, "Oh, the brain learns and it's flexible and can move, and you're in charge of the brain." And then they gave them a lecture on honeybees. And then another group of first graders, they gave them the lecture of honeybees without telling them that the brain is powerful, the brain learns, you're in charge. The kids who are given the lecture about the brain being powerful and that you're in charge of it remembered more about the honeybees because they felt more in control, right? So the more we can make the learning explicit, and we want our kids to tell us, that's working for me, or this doesn't work for me. And it has to be a discussion. It's not gonna just, suddenly be apparent. But then they can label it. They can label when, oh, I'm getting this because I really, this diagram makes sense to me. Or, this is hard because it's just like too many words and I got lost. We want them to know what works so that we can accommodate, remediate, and strengthen, okay? All three things. So, thank you very much. And, at Mindwell, we work with kids every day, and it's about finding a learning disability. We have a real specialty in dyslexia, ADHD, but also optimizing learning so that it's fun, that the kids feel in control. And then I am gonna do just a shameless plug. I did just write a children's book on wellness. So Peek and Boo, and it's about a peacock discovering, why doesn't the peacock have colorful feathers? And he discovers his feathers through different pillars of wellness. So that's just my side project. So thank you, but question.